students to be doing, not just the knowledge they have. The habits of mind we'd like them to develop. We'd like them looking for patterns, conjecturing, looking for counterexamples, proving. In the service of that, using multiple representations flexibly, making mathematical connections. A seminar that Abraham Arkavi and I gave at this university was that basically the goal is for students to become mathematical sense makers, developing certain habits of mind that are productive. And those take time and consistent experience to develop. So even just core mathematics is very complex. And that's just the beginning. Problem-solving strategies take a huge amount of work to learn. That was my early work. It is doable, but it takes a substantial amount of work to decompose problem-solving strategies, to teach them to students, to give them enough variation so that those things come to mind naturally and get used effectively. And again, the goal of teaching problem solving is not the way it has been perverted in most instruction, which is I will show you some strategies and test you on your ability to use them. It's if I have taught you properly to become an effective problem solver, then you should be able to solve problems that I have not taught you how to solve. That has been the goal of my problem-solving instruction, and it does work. But again, it takes concerted effort. Issues of monitoring and self-regulation or metacognition. On the screen in front of you is a timeline graph that now there have been thousands of these made of students solving problems that they've been given. And 60% of them on average look like this. A student reads the problem, jumps into a solution, and runs out of time without having found it. This, in contrast, was the graph of a mathematician solving a complex two-part problem. Each of those little triangles represents a time that the mathematician stopped and said, wait, am I on the right track? Am I understanding what's happening? Maybe I'd better rethink this. In some cases, it's maybe I'd start from the beginning and go back and analyze. I want to make sure I'm on the right track. And it was because of that that some of the explorations got truncated and the problem solver had time to rethink, plan, and ultimately find solutions. This was a graph of some students after my problem solving class working a complex problem. They jumped into a solution in Explore, but as they were implementing, they did stop, reconsider, go back and plan, and ultimately wind up with a solution to the problem. The point is that these metacognitive skills can be learned and they contribute directly to the effectiveness of problem solving and more broadly, mathematical thinking. Finally, the topic of beliefs and dispositions, which are what students develop by virtue of their experience in mathematical classrooms. And the question is, as they walk out of class, is their sense of mathematics that mathematics is something that gets memorized and applied, or something you can figure out? Is mathematics, is it the case that all problems can be solved in 5 minutes or less because I have that much time on my examinations and that's the practice? Or given a challenging problem, I can make progress over time? Is it, I'm taught certain techniques and if I forget them or I haven't learned a particular technique, I don't know what to do, I quit? Or Given a problem, there are various ways I might make progress on it. Well, the sad fact is that the majority of students, as a result of their experience in math classes, emerge with the beliefs in blue, and that shapes the way they go about doing mathematics. To presage what comes next, these are issues of agency. I feel I can do it, or this is not for me. Authority, often in the sense of authoring. I can do the mathematics. I own the mathematics. And identity. I am a math person or I'm not. Now, these are aspects of thinking mathematically. They are the goals for individual students that we'd like to have. We should be paying attention to them. Most of you know that they were the topics of my 1985 book, Mathematical Problem Solving. The challenge is that we knew all this in 1985, and we see very little of other than the content in classrooms today. We're 35 years behind the times in attending to the things we know that matter. Okay. Next, I want to turn to the learning environment, which is, of course, where students pick up their understanding of what it is to think mathematically. And I want to do the same thing. I want to focus on what's central in learning environments. This is a general theory, but it applies in particular to mathematical classrooms. The goal is to understand the nature of classrooms from which students emerge as powerful thinkers, or to understand what the challenges are in the way of that. So I'm going to ask one big question, which is, what are 5 fundamental properties of classrooms from which students emerge as knowledgeable and resourceful thinkers and problem solvers? 5, because we need a small number of things to pay attention to. If there are too many, then it's hard to keep track of them and make sense of things and teach effectively. So I'm about to introduce you to the Teaching for Robust Understanding framework. Given the amount of time I have, I'm not going to go through the extensive literature that we reviewed and all of the background. There's time just for illustrating it, and I'm going to do that by showing you one video and then indicating important things that took place in that video that are representative of aspects of the true framework. So here is some background. The video was made in Chicago, which is in the United States, known as one of the most challenging school districts, many schools in poverty, large minoritized population. 6th grade students working one of the Shell Center's formative assessment lessons called Translating Between Fractions, Decimals, and Percents. The lesson starts with the students being given the assignment. On these 9 cards, you'll find a decimal or a percent. Fill in the missing one. Then place the cards in order of size. Now, that's where life gets interesting, because those of you who've worked with 6th graders know that a substantial number of the students will believe that in the middle row, 375 is larger than 75, and they will say it's larger. And then when the students have to check that they agree, they'll start arguing and there'll be some interesting mathematical discourse. But that's just the beginning of the task. The students are then given area models, asked to match up the area models and put everything from smallest to largest and check that they all agree. And then do the same thing with fractions and number lines. So by the time they're done, their desktop will be covered with cards that look like this, where you may have noticed some spaces were blank. The gray things represent blank spaces in the original cards where they had to fill in the answers by themselves. Now in the video I'm going to show you, you'll mostly see the students working in small groups. And at the beginning, you'll see one student explaining how to convert 50% to a decimal. You'll note how all the students are explaining to each other in this. It's an active class where the students serve as resources for each other. Later on, the right-hand column had the value 1.25. They had to fill in the area model. And one student drew the picture down at the bottom of my screen. Another student challenged him and said, no, that's not 1.25, that's only 1. The first student says, no, 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 I'm right. Each of these squares is worth maybe 5. And then 5, 10, 15, 20, they all add up to 125. And the first student challenges him again very respectfully. The classroom norms are very interesting, saying, wait a second. You're holding a whole, that's 100%. Which is bigger, 125% or 100%? First, the second student says, well, 125%. Doesn't that mean that what you produced, 125%, should be bigger than a whole? And you'll see the argument he goes through. Here's the actual tape. And then afterward, I will use the tape to indicate how this fits with the Teaching for Robust Understanding framework. Oops.
I don't know how many of you, well, everyone should remember this worksheet that we did that was fractions, decimals, and percents. Okay, and remember I said it's more of a pre-assessment to see what you know already and what we still need to work on. So based on what you did on this worksheet, we're going to do an activity today where you're going to be working with your partner most of the time. Okay, there are going to be times where you're going to work with your group, and I'll let you know when those times are. All right, so right now everyone's getting a worksheet. Once you and your partner have sorted your cards, so you're filling in the blanks first, then you're sorting them from left to right. That's why I don't want anything else on your desk, so you have space. Once you've sorted them, then you're going to turn and talk to your group members to check and challenge your explanation if they disagree. And remember, you have your sentence starters that you can use, and they're in your notebook as well, to challenge or each other's explanations or check for understanding.
So for 50%, to change it into a decimal, you need to put the 0 because it's not a whole yet, because it's at 50, it's at half. Because the percent sign equals out of 100. So now the tens place would equal 50 because 10 times 5 equals 50. So now it's a decimal, so it's tens. So, and if you wanted to add a 0, it would be a fine. So it could be more easier to understand and review 50. I want to challenge Kashana on 80%. I think it's wrong.
Yes,
I disagree with you. I disagree with you, Kishanda, because 80% does not equal 0.08%.
I disagree with you. Can you please clarify how did you get it?
Can you clarify how you did it?
So if you put 0.5, it means that you're practically saying that it's 50%. So change it to 5. Change it to just plain 5%.
So Kevin, do you know why she changed it to 5%? Yes, because that's the only one
But like, do you understand why did she say to change it to 5%?
Yes.
Why?
It's 50%. No, 5% or just one with the small goes 50%.
Yeah. So let's go. We put net 12.5%.
Same thing.
Yeah. So then should be this one. Let's get this. Okay.
So I think I know how you got 1/25, because what you did was one whole because of the 1, and then when you did 1/4 because of the 25, which is 1/4 because 25 times 4 equals 100. Well, you can kind of get the idea of quarters, and then that's how you got 125% and 1 1/4.
Yeah, that's right. And then we got like 12.5% over here because it's 1/8. 1/2 equals 50%, and then to get 1/4, you have to divide that, which equals 25%, and then you have to divide that to get 1/8, and 25 divided by half, I mean 2, equals 12.5%. And over here it's 3/8. Well, I already explained that 1/8 equals 12.5%, and 12.5% times 3 equals, let me see, 37.5%, which is right. So 3x equals 37.5%. I know that you got 125% for 1.25, and that is right. That 1 point, that is right. That 1 equals 1.25%. But the problem is the picture. You just shaded like this whole thing and this, and even if it's not even a whole because you're missing this part and like
I'm not missing any part. It's not like
yeah,
supposed
it's
to be
not
close.
1 and it's not 125% equals 1 and a 4.
No,
And
it's
this is
not supposed to be 1 and a 4. It's actually most likely all these squares it just equals 5 in each square.
You know?
Yeah, because if you would actually like if you would do like 5, 10, and it would all go to 125. Now I would like to see what you done.
I'm gonna challenge you. What does 1 equal? 1 equals what percent? 1, the number 1, 100. What's greater, 125% or 1%? 100%. 125%.
125.
So doesn't that means that since 125% is greater, doesn't that means that 125% is more than 1?
Yes.
Tell me if this answer is right or wrong.
It's right.
Why is it right?
It's right because if it does now actually I think I know where you're going with this. The fraction for this would be
1 and
Yeah.
4. That's where I'm going.
Why didn't you let me see?
Sorry.
Okay, I hope you were able to hear and see what happened there. It's a pretty amazing exchange. Certainly there was more substance and more respectful interactions between those 6th grade students than I find in many faculty meetings. But that notwithstanding, let me get back to the big question, which was, what are 5 fundamental properties of classrooms from which students emerge as knowledgeable and resourceful thinkers and problem solvers? And of course, you only got to see a few minutes of that classroom, but given the ways that the students interacted, given that they were focusing on underlying meaning, it's reasonable to infer that they would emerge as powerful thinkers. In fact, You know, I said I would spare you the many years of research. I'm about to show you the true framework, which has 5 dimensions of powerful classrooms. And we have tons of data that shows that in classrooms that do well along those 5 dimensions, the students do very well on various measures of thinking and problem solving. And to the degree that the classrooms do not, the students do not. So let me move on to actually give you the distillation directly. Here are the 5 dimensions of the teaching for robust understanding, or true framework. The first dimension, simply put, is the richness of the content in which the students are engaging. It stands to reason that when a student emerges from a classroom, what the content and practices that the student engage in, that the classroom offers, place an upper bound on the student's proficiency. If the materials they engage with are not rich, then there's very little chance that they will emerge as powerful, knowledgeable thinkers. So the discipline as represented in classroom interactions is, it goes without saying, extremely important. And in this particular tape, what you saw was students engaging with some of the fundamental core content of the elementary curriculum, various representations, issues of magnitude. In fact, research on what students find challenging went into the design of the lessons. But as we all know, the content is not enough. When I was a graduate student in mathematics at Stanford, I took a class in complex variables from Max Schiffer, who was the world's expert on relativity and complex variables at the time. And he was an absolutely gorgeous lecturer. I sat in class going, mathematics is beautiful. The universe is beautiful. I understand everything. It's marvelous. And then I went home and I couldn't do homework problem number 1. Okay, so it's not just the content, it's how the students interact with the content. And that's what the next 4 dimensions of the true framework are about. The second is cognitive demand. The jargon term for that, thanks to Vygotsky, is the zone of proximal development. The question is, are students engaging in such a way that they're being stretched and they learn by being stretched? If the work is trivial, there's no opportunity for growth. If the work is too far above them, as some of Schiffer's lectures were, they can't make the connections. So the question is it at the right level of difficulty to stretch them? And that's what we saw in that tape. We saw the students clearly being challenged, but also in such a way that they could make progress themselves. And I would point out that one of the things here, when I go back to dimension 1, the mathematics, is that they were engaging not only with the content, but with some very important practices, such as explaining coherently. Go back to the first thing, what's thinking mathematically? It includes practices like being able to lay out the content in rich ways. So there's the content, there's the cognitive demand. Are they being stretched? Then my definition, a focal definition for good classrooms, if it's a powerful classroom, then every student learns and every student has the opportunity to engage with the content in meaningful ways. We've all seen classrooms in which the teacher calls on the same 3 kids over and over, and the content is beautiful, but all of the other students are deprived of serious engagement in learning. That's not a powerful classroom. The question is, does every student get to engage, and engage in such a way that what they build is a sense of themselves as people who can do mathematical sense making, who can put things together for themselves. And the interesting thing about the tape we watched is that in that final exchange, even the student who was being challenged wound up saying, okay, this is how it happens, and explained in his own terms, I see it. And he'll have his turn to explain to others, so he can build a sense of agency, of ownership, of identity, see himself as a math person. And as you saw in the parts of the tape before that exchange, sometimes the students were being explained to, sometimes they were explaining. They were a part of a mathematical community of people who were doing sense making. That's what leads to the sense that you can do the mathematics, the sense of agency, the sense of mathematical identity. And the way that all of this worked, you didn't see the teacher doing much here, but the teacher is monitoring what's going on and making sure the student conversations are productive. Formative assessment consists of attending to, well, providing opportunities for the students to reveal their understandings and then helping adjust the lesson in ways that it meets the students where they are. Now, the one comment I want to make about formative assessment is that often teachers think, oh my God, there's all this responsibility on my shoulders. I need to understand all the students' thinking. I need to find each individual student's misconception and fix it. That's an impossible job. And that's right, it is an impossible job if you think as a teacher you need to do it all by yourself. What we saw in that tape is the students are tremendous resources for each other. And in that, the students wind up being an essential part of formative assessment. Okay, so those are the 5 dimensions of powerful classrooms. The richness of the discipline as students experience it, whether or not they're working in their zone of proximal development, engaged in productive struggle, whether it's every single student engaging in ways that they can see themselves as sense makers, and whether the environment supports that kind of interaction. The key point, all but the first dimension, focuses on the classroom as experienced by the student. Because it's the student who matters. It's the teacher who helps organize that environment. But the 4 of the 5 dimensions, again, focus on the student experience. Let me briefly talk about some of the things that are important with regard to this framework. 4 central points. The first, from the research, these 5 dimensions are necessary and sufficient. Necessary if any of them go wrong, there will be a problem with learning outcomes. Sufficient to the degree that things go well, students will be empowered as learners. If you go to our website, trueframework.org, there are loads of papers that provide background for that. The second, again, is a shift in perspective. Normally, when you think about teaching, when you think about classrooms, the question that coaches ask, the question that administrators ask when they walk into the classroom is, do I like what the teacher is doing? That's the wrong question. The question should be, put yourself in the position of a student and ask yourself, what is my experience? What does instruction feel like from my perspective? Because it's the student who's doing the learning. And this slide is perhaps my favorite slide. If an observer internalizes these questions and provides feedback to the teacher, that's the biggest mechanism for growth. From the point of view of the content, as a student, what's the big idea in this lesson? How does it connect to what I already know? In the ways that I learn it, how long am I given to think? What opportunities do I have for sense making? What happens when I get stuck? Do I have opportunities to explain or just produce answers? For every single student, are there ways that I'm engaged and that I participate, or can I hide or be ignored? And when I engage, do I have opportunities to explain my ideas? How are those ideas built on? How am I seen as a member of this mathematical community? And how's my thinking included? And when I get an idea out there, does it become part of the conversation? To the degree that these things happen for each student, that student will emerge as a powerful thinker. Okay, point 3, it's very important to note that nothing in the framework says, teach this way. What the framework says is, if things go well along these dimensions, students will become powerful learners. And the reason for that, if you stop and think about it, think about the 2 best teachers you ever had. Their teaching was not identical. But if you retrospectively look at the 5 dimensions of true, you'll find out they did well along all 5 dimensions. The point is that there are many ways to be a good teacher, and True describes the principles of powerful instruction. Good teachers are consistent with the values of True, but they go about it in their own ways. Anyone who tells you this is the way to teach effectively is highly disrespectful of teaching. The idea is that True offers principles of powerful instruction so that you can ask for each dimension, how can I get better at that dimension? Can the mathematics be made more rich? Am I sure, and in what ways am I making sure that my students are being stretched but not too far? What am I doing to make sure that every student has the opportunity to engage in meaningful ways, in ways that they get their ideas on the table, they respond to others' thinking, and so on. So True is a way of problematizing instruction. And finally, same thing about, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I will offer you some tools. If you go to the True website, what you'll find is a collection of tools that help you problematize teaching and make it more rich and provide more opportunities for your students. An interesting thing is that once you internalize True, it becomes a way of thinking that's natural, and it provides a language for talking about instruction. The head of Chicago mathematics told me that one of the things she found is that for the very first time, her kindergarten teachers could talk to her 6th grade teachers about instruction, they could talk to their 8th grade teachers and to their school principals, because they were all focusing on the same things in instruction. Again, I could talk about professional development, I could talk about tools, but this is to talk about difficulties. So please, if you jot down the website address on the bottom, you'll see lots more resources that we can offer you. So I'm about to turn to issues of context. As I do, I want to do the same thing that I did for the problem-solving book. I mentioned that 35 years ago, we knew the kinds of things we should focus on in classes in terms of what it meant to be a powerful mathematical thinker. And we simply haven't done it. Much the same is true, although the research is more recent, much the same is true of what happens in classrooms conceptualized as learning environments. When I was first, one of the ways that I validated the research was we built a scoring rubric that scored classrooms along each of the dimensions. We had measures that evaluated student performance, and we looked for correlations. That was the basis of my statement that classrooms that do well along the 5 dimensions result in students being powerful thinkers. Part of the problem that we had in building the scoring rubric is that with scores of 1, 1.5 through 3, the vast majority of classrooms scored 1 on every single dimension. So not only have we not been attending to powerful thinking, we haven't been attending to powerful classroom practices. And now part of the question is why, and that's the depressing third part of this talk. I've talked about thinking mathematically and the learning environment, so now let me refer to the cultural surround. So I'll start with curricula. And although there are some good curricula, by and large, the materials our teachers have to work with are thoroughly inadequate. If you think about the first aspects of problem solving that I talked about, the knowledge base, problem solving, strategies, building aspects of metacognition, providing environments in which students engage so that they can develop productive habits of mind and productive beliefs. And you look at most curricula, they do a miserable job of supporting that. And it's not because we don't know how. What I showed you, the videotape I showed you, is from a second-year teacher who was using one of the formative assessment lessons. The formative assessment lessons cost about $6 million to build as a grant. There are 100 of them. They cost about $50,000 per lesson. That sounds like a lot of money. We have very strong evidence that there is really powerful learning going on. The amount of learning from those lessons is spectacular. The methodology for building them is known. That was Malcolm Swann's genius. To scale up to an entire curriculum might cost on the order of $100 million. That sounds like a lot of money, but you need to put it in perspective. A number of years ago, Purina, the dog company, dog food company, had a 2-page ad in Scientific American that said, "We are Purina. We care about your dogs and cats. We spend $200 million a year doing research on pet food and medicines for your dogs and cats. Well, if we spend $200 million a year on animal welfare, we can invest $100 million in building curricula that students learn from. It's a matter of will, not a matter of not knowing how to do it. So there are curriculum-related challenges. There are assessment-related challenges. I suspect that a fair number of you know the phrase WYTIWIG, W-Y-T-I-W-I-G, that was coined by Hugh Burkhardt. That's what you test is what, whoops, that should have been a Y, what you get. Because teachers teach to the test. And again, we know that there are ways to create assessments that are actually rich opportunities, not only for student performance and student learning, but when you have teachers discuss their students' work on these tasks, they're rich opportunities for professional developments. Hugh Burkhardt and I built the specifications for one such system in the United States. The state assessment managers said, it would cost too much money to implement this. We want cheap machine gradable tests. Net result is the tests are terrible. Teachers teach to them and the tests degrade instruction instead of supporting it. Third, there are challenges related to research and development. Very briefly, the system works against the R&D system works against the improvement of practice. And that's for two major reasons. The best way to improve things is to do so systematically, to build on previous results, to refine previous results. The academic value system doesn't reward replications, it rewards new ideas. So academics have little interest in minor refinements of things that are known, especially if you're at a high-powered research university. Doing something that focuses on practice isn't prestigious. And the best way to create powerful materials is in large research teams. But what that means is the vast majority of members of that team are part of the et al. Anonymously. They get no credit for the work. And that hurts too. So R&D are not supportive of improving practice. When it comes to teacher support, I don't know, I think actually I've heard about both Eastern, Western nations, all of the Americas. It was very clear when COVID happened just what priority teachers actually have. Because in the United States, well, we had a fascist for president, so we got some of the worst of it, but this was across the boards internationally. The story was, it's businesses that count. We need students back in school, so let's force them in. And Trump's administration declared teachers to be critical infrastructure workers, which meant teachers had to go into school and teach long before there were vaccines. That gives you an idea of what priority teachers were given. And to this day, as vaccines are available, very few states and localities have made teachers highest priority for being vaccinated. That's an indication of American national priorities. Now, if we take a step back, the given model in the United States is you take someone with subject matter preparation, you give them a year of pedagogical preparation, and you send them out and they're supposed to be competent at teaching. You give them occasional workshops. I know here I'm preaching to the choir, you all know this, but you certainly wouldn't want to go to a doctor for a serious medical issue who had been prepared and trained in the ways that we prepare teachers. The problem is teachers are not, teaching is not taken seriously. And the strongest indication of that is when COVID hit, teachers were mandated to move to virtual instruction with little or no support, and nobody thought about the question of maybe we should change the goals of instruction. No, let's hold students to the same standards. Let's give the same tests. That's not living in the real world. Okay, that was a serious problem, and it's an indication of how seriously teaching is taken. My final challenge, and then I'll wrap up. We got started a bit late. When you think about the cultural surround, in the United States and many other Western systems, there is tracking. And tracking means that some students go into classes with significant opportunities, others go into classes that have weaker curricula, don't move nearly as far. That tracking is generally correlated with race and socioeconomic status. You walk into the advanced calculus classes in many school districts, the populations are white and Asian. You walk into the remedial classes, they're underrepresented minorities. And the inequalities are economic. There's a 30-year-old book called Savage Inequalities that talks about the correlation between poverty and race. And the problem is it's not just structural. Nirul Shah has a paper that says that tracked a bunch of students in classrooms, and the first day of class, a very talented African-American student walked into his advanced calculus class where all the other students were white and Asian, and one student looked up and said, "What are you doing here?" Now think about issues of agency, ownership, identity, with that as the within classroom context because of the outside of classroom context. So if you think about it, there are major challenges with regard to our living up to our understanding of what it means to think mathematically, our living up to our understanding of what it means to provide and support rich learning environments, and the fact that the cultural surround is not even supportive of those inner two circles. So it isn't really surprising that we find it such an uphill battle. Now that was the comment that led my students to say, "Alan, this is so depressing. Surely you can't end the talk this way." And I said, no, in fact, I've always been an optimist. And one way to think about that optimism is, I'm 300 to 400 years old, and I can look at the differences between when I entered the field, actually in the 1970s and now. We understand a tremendous amount more than we did before. When I entered the field, we had no sense of what thinking was about. Constructivism was not even a slogan. We didn't understand the cognitive sciences. We didn't understand sociocultural work and how it fed into classrooms. We've learned a huge amount more. The question is, can we break out of the straitjacket we're in and say, this past year is crazy. Next year is going to be a year of recovery. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and hoping you'll get a different result. Maybe we should stop, rethink, and take advantage of the current situation. The phrase is never let a good crisis go to waste, and ask ourselves, what really matters? What should students learn? What are the big ideas? How can we think about making change so that we reorient the enterprise in productive ways, given everything we know? I happen to be a real optimist about that. And I think my age has something to do with that. Through the years, I've seen tremendous ups and downs. In the 1970s, leading up to 1980, we made tremendous progress. National Science Foundation was at the edge of supporting tremendous reform in instruction. Then Ronald Reagan was elected president and he wiped out all of that from the National Science Foundation. We went from wonderful down to terrible. Then we went up to wonderful again and down to terrible again. We've gone through a rough time. If you look at it, in my experience, progress looks somewhat like the equation y equals 0.1x plus sine x. If you're riding the curve, there are tremendous ups and downs. You can see it feels good for a while, then it's a disaster. But if you take the long view, if you're as old as I am, then you get to see the progress in the long run. And I am absolutely convinced that we will continue to progress. And I look forward to the next 100 years of progressing with you. Thank you for your patience, and I'll turn it back to the organizers at this point.
Thank you so much, Professor Schoenfeld, for this talk. And I hope we will all be able to accompany you in your next 100 years of work. Osvaldo, how are we with respect to time?
Doctora, tenemos unos 5 minutos, entre 5 y 7 minutos para las preguntas.
Okay. So that means one question. Maybe two.
Sí, en el chat están. A ver.
Okay, go. Lee.
Okay, so
we're looking at the chat to see what questions we may have, Professor Schoenfeld.
Right. So the first question that I see, ¿cómo hacer que la evaluación formativa no sea solo diálogos de los profesores y se lleve a la práctica de manera correcta? One of the slides I showed the formative assessment lessons. You can find a link on our website. If you Google formative assessment lesson Shell Center, you will find that you can download 100 lessons for free. That was our deal with the Gates Foundation. We didn't want to make money. We wanted to provide resources for them. And the dialogue that you saw in that classroom was students helping each other. The materials are set up so that was one part of it. The materials are set up so that questions are posed to groups of students so that they get to work together and they serve as resources for each other. There are times in the lessons that the teacher does whole class and summarizes big ideas or points to issues that the students are having difficulty with. But the lessons themselves provide scaffolding for teachers for helping the students do most of the important work. Some of the evaluations that were done, the Gates Foundation didn't trust us, so they sent evaluators into the classrooms to study what happened, and they gave students tests and they discovered tremendous student learning goals, but they also interviewed the teachers. And among the comments that we got from the teachers were, I wouldn't have believed that my students were capable of this. I now find my students are much smarter than I thought. I don't have to tell them everything. If I sit back and let them do the work, they are capable of so much more. That's where the real learning takes place. So it's very hard to do this. Our natural tendency as teachers is to say, I want to make sure they hear it, so I'm going to say it. And that really doesn't give students as learners credit for being as smart as they are, as diligent as they are. It takes a leap of faith. When I first started working with teachers, I said, look, I know that these are things that will work. They said, our students are going to be tested. I'm concerned for them if I don't do all the things I know how to do, that they will not test well. And one teacher said to me, I will try your program this year, but if my students' test scores go down 1 point, I am out of your program. And I said, fine. And that year, her students' test scores went up and we worked together happily for 10 years. But it takes a leap of faith and it takes materials to support the teachers in doing that. I think the formative assessment lessons provide that kind of support. I can briefly respond to Oscar Guerrero Contreras' comment. Because it's about virtual instruction, regarding these 5 principles, I'd like to clarify. It's important to consider these in terms of the pandemic and virtual teaching, that students have a mode of communication technology that makes the learning and teaching different. And it needs to be viewed in a different way. I think that's critically important. I was among the teachers who found themselves confronted with virtual instruction. And life is much harder without the personal contact. So in my own class, one of the things I do is we start each week with personal check-ins. I used to have a community in the class. I could get a sense of how my students were. Now at the beginning of each week, everybody talks about how they are and how their week was and what challenges they're facing. That's a part of instruction. It's a human endeavor. I use the breakout rooms a lot because that's the way we build community. I use collective Google Docs, so there are times when everybody writes on the same document so that we can all share an understanding of what everybody is thinking. The technology is different. It's something to be taken advantage of, but the underlying principles of truth are still the same. I'm still asking, in the use of this technology, am I making sure my students are engaging with the richest content, with disciplinary thinking in rich ways? Am I in the small groups using the video documents, using assignments where they respond to readings and then each other, so they build dialogues electronically? I have 50 pages of student comment on 2 readings where they go into the readings and on each other's comments. Can I use Zoom? Can I use our various technological tools to facilitate all the things I want to say? Underlying that, the true framework helps me do that. There's no question we should take advantage of the technology. Apologies for going on. So I will stop again at this point. Osvaldo?
Thank you once again. Yes, I think it is time for our next speaker. 11:45, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Ángela.
Thank you very much again, once again.
Gracias, doctor Alan Schoenfeld. Muchas gracias por su excelente conferencia.
Muchas gracias, doctor Alan Schoenfeld, por este gran espacio académico que nos acaba de brindar. En el chat se pondrá un link para el registro de la asistencia. Les pedimos el favor de que ingresen y hagan su registro. A continuación, tenemos la conferencia plenaria a cargo del doctor Abraham Arcavi. Invitamos a la doctora Diana Pérez para hacer la presentación del conferencista.
Buenos días. Bienvenido, doctor Abraham Arcavi. El doctor Abraham Arcavi se incorporó al Instituto Weizmann como científico en 1988 y hoy es el titular de la cátedra Lester B. Pearson. Se desempeñó como jefe del Departamento de Enseñanza de las Ciencias entre 2001 y 2005. Y ha colaborado con el Ministerio de Educación de Israel y con la Iniciativa para la Investigación Aplicada en Educación de la Academia de Ciencias y Humanidades de Israel. Es miembro de los comités de programas de posgrado tanto a nivel local como en el extranjero. Es revisor de fundaciones, universidades y revistas nacionales e internacionales. Ha impartido conferencias y dirige talleres y cursos en Israel y en el extranjero. Ha trabajado en el desarrollo de planes de estudio y se ha centrado en la competencia para decodificar y usar representaciones como símbolos y gráficos, y la visualización como herramientas para comprender y hacer matemáticas. Ha participado como conferencista invitado en diversos eventos en Argentina, Uruguay, Alemania, Suiza, España, México, Japón, Holanda, Francia, entre otros. Actualmente es el secretario general del ICME. Sin más, los dejamos con el doctor Abraham Arcavi.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. No sé si me escuchan.
Sí, señor.
Muchísimas gracias por la presentación y muchas gracias por haberme invitado a este simposio. Es un honor para mí estar con ustedes. Y una pequeña corrección, hace 1 mes y medio que ya no soy el secretario general del ICME. Solo quería aclarar ese punto. En este momento en que se habla tanto de distanciamiento social y de alejamiento, es una bendición tener este medio tecnológico que nos acerca. Veo un montón de rostros de amigos y colegas y es un placer poder comunicarnos y a pesar del distanciamiento nos estamos acercando a través de este medio. Nuevamente muchas gracias por haberme invitado. Voy a compartir con ustedes pantalla. De alguna manera lo que voy a hacer es engancharme con la presentación de mi predecesor, el profesor Alan Schoenfeld, mi maestro de más de casi 4 décadas, y voy a hacer una especie de zoom in, valga el doble sentido de la palabra, hacer una especie de zoom in en una de las prácticas de matemáticas que se insertarían en lo que yo llamaría las clases potentes que presentó el profesor Schoenfeld. Una de las prácticas que es incurrir en soluciones alternativas de problemas matemáticos. Un tema pequeño, un tema micro, pero que puede ser muy interesante abordarlo, y espero que entre los docentes de matemáticas, los educadores de matemáticas, los formadores de docentes y los que quieran, y los investigadores encuentren esta presentación interesante. Empiezo con un pequeño problema de matemáticas prestado de una colección de problemas que diseñó el profesor Judah Schwartz, lamentablemente fallecido no hace muchos meses. Y este problema es un problema que él diseñó entre los tantos que ha diseñado con muchísima destreza. Presenta una serie de rectángulos y la pregunta es visualmente cuál nos parece que es el más cuadrado de ellos, cuál es el que tendría un grado más grande de cuadricidad. Es decir, cuál parece ser el más cuadrado. Y visualmente, cuando el caso es así, donde hay ejemplos extremos, es bastante visible que el rectángulo superior derecho es el que más se asemeja a un cuadrado. Pero cuando los rectángulos son más parecidos entre sí, es más difícil, y entonces el problema pide diseñar una medida de cuadricidad. Dada las dimensiones del cuadrado, diseñar una medida de cuál es más cuadrado. Ese es el primer problema al cual me quiero referir. Piénsenlo. El segundo problema al que me quiero referir es un problema de aritmética. Tengo 2.75 euros o cualquier moneda. ¿Cuántas monedas tengo? El tercer problema que quiero presentar, ¿cuántos rectángulos hay en un tablero de ajedrez? Cuando digo cuántos rectángulos, si tuviera un tablero de 2×2, mi manera de contar sería primero el rectángulo grande, después 4 pequeños, 4 intermedios. O sea que tendría 9 rectángulos. ¿Cuántos rectángulos tendría en un tablero de 8×8? Mi cuarto problema es, este es un número palíndromo, o como lo llaman en algunos lugares, capicúa, la palabra de origen catalán, y la pregunta sería, ¿cuántos números palíndromos hay de 5 cifras? Estos 4 problemas los quiero clasificar de la siguiente manera. ¿Qué tienen en común los 2 problemas que están más arriba y los 2 problemas que están más abajo? ¿Qué tienen en común aún sin resolverlos? Teniendo una sensación de qué es lo que nos pide cada uno de los problemas. Bueno, a lo que me voy a referir es a soluciones alternativas y al doble significado de la palabra soluciones alternativas, o mejor dicho, al doble significado de la palabra solución. Solución que se refiere al resultado. En este caso, la alternativa es que el producto final del problema puede ser diferente, puede haber diferentes productos finales que resuelven el problema, y este es el caso de estos 2 problemas, porque puedo crear una medida de cuadricidad y alguien viene y crea otra medida. Y ahí se crea una situación interesante de comparar las medidas, el rango de las medidas y demás, si son definiciones bien dadas. Una gran discusión se puede dar a eso, pero admitimos que hay más de una posibilidad de crear una medida. Hay más de una posibilidad de crear un conjunto de monedas que tiene la misma suma final, dadas las unidades que existen. Por el otro lado, la solución se puede referir no solo al resultado, sino al proceso. Y en ese caso la alternativa sería una ruta diferente hacia un mismo producto final. Y este es el caso de estos dos problemas. Porque ¿cuántos números Capicúa tenemos? Hay una sola respuesta. ¿Cuántos rectángulos hay en un tablero de ajedrez? Hay una sola respuesta. Pero puede haber muchas maneras de arribar a esa sola respuesta. Es decir, que tengo dos acepciones, dos interpretaciones de de la expresión soluciones alternativas. Y una de las cosas que quiero mencionar es este libro que me parece sumamente interesante, donde plantea una colección de problemas muy interesantes, donde se llaman open-ended, problemas abiertos, porque el producto final puede ser muy diferente. Pero yo en esta pequeña presentación me quiero referir a soluciones alternativas en el sentido de presentar una ruta diferente hacia un mismo producto final. Muchas veces nuestros alumnos, cuando en nuestras prácticas de aula queremos incorporar la cuestión de resolver un problema de maneras distintas, el alumno viene y nos dice, pero si el problema ya está resuelto, ¿para qué resolverlo de nuevo? Y el maestro dice, el tiempo que lleva a resolver el mismo problema de otra manera, lo puedo usar para otro problema. O sea que la cuestión de soluciones alternativas, que es una práctica en matemáticas bien establecida y bien enraizada, puede toparse en el aula con la oposición o el antagonismo tanto del docente como del alumno por razones diferentes. Y lo que quiero en este mensaje es proveer ciertos argumentos para responder tanto al docente como al alumno y convencer que la práctica de soluciones alternativas es una norma que se puede enraizar en el aula de matemáticas y que puede contribuir a lo que el profesor Schoenfeld llamaba un entendimiento más robusto de las matemáticas. Que es una práctica enraizada en las matemáticas. Acá traigo solamente una muestra, pero es una muestra muy representativa de alguien que se ocupa de las matemáticas y que dice, uno de los grandes placeres en matemáticas ocurre cuando uno considera varias demostraciones de un mismo resultado. En realidad, cuando uno considera la miríada de demostraciones del problema de Pitágoras, hay un libro que presenta casi 400, y la irracionalidad de la raíz cuadrada de 2, construidas a través de los siglos, parecería que nosotros los humanos nunca podemos estar satisfechos con solo una demostración. ¿Por qué continuamos creando nuevos enfoques a resultados sabidos? Hay algo en el razonamiento mismo que produce conocimiento sobre el problema más allá de lo que nos dice el resultado. Es como mirar una escultura desde varias perspectivas para poder apreciarla en su totalidad. Y lo que quiero hacer en el resto de esta conversación con ustedes es convencerlos de esto y aportar aún otros argumentos más allá de lo que se dice en esta cita. ¿Para qué entonces queremos soluciones alternativas? El tiempo que lleva a resolver el mismo problema de otra manera lo puedo usar para otro problema. Bueno, aunque no lo lleve al aula, quizás es bueno saber que algunos alumnos lo resolverán distinto y así estoy más preparado. O sea que una primera respuesta que un docente puede llegar a convencerse es que conocer una solución alternativa del problema, una respuesta pragmática, es estar preparado para una solución inesperada que presenta un alumno en la clase y para la cual no estoy preparado. O sea que es para mi propio caudal. Un hermoso ejemplo está dado en un artículo del año 1973 en el periódico el Mathematics Teacher. En una clase de matemáticas, el profesor estaba trabajando con los alumnos encontrar una fracción entre dos fracciones dadas. Y la práctica que se había desarrollado, que habían propuesto los alumnos, es hacer el promedio de las dos fracciones, porque el promedio siempre es mayor que la menor y menor que la mayor. O sea que era sumar las dos fracciones y dividir por 2. La actividad tenía dos objetivos. Uno era practicar la suma de fracciones y el otro convencerlos a los alumnos de la densidad de los números racionales, que siempre entre dos números racionales, mediante la práctica de buscar su promedio, podemos encontrar un tercero. Y en todo caso sale un alumno que levanta la mano y dice, pero profesor, ¿por qué tomarse este trabajo? Sumar fracciones es bastante trabajoso. Sume de numerador y numerador, y sume denominador y denominador, y obtendrá una fracción entre las dos dadas. Y el profesor se quedó estupefacto, primero pensando, acá hay otro alumno que comete el error clásico de sumar fracciones, sumar denominadores y sumar numeradores. Pero le dio una chance al alumno y le dijo, veamos algunos ejemplos. Y tomaron 2, 3, 4, 5 ejemplos y vieron que sumando numerador y numerador y denominador, obtenían una fracción que efectivamente estaba entre las dos fracciones dadas, un fenómeno matemático que lo propuso un alumno, una solución alternativa a buscar una fracción entre dos, y que el profesor no la tenía clara. O sea que una primera respuesta pragmática para aquel profesor de que para qué necesita un espectro de soluciones alternativas, esta pequeña anécdota le responde que, bueno, para estar preparado para posibles soluciones de sus alumnos, que tomando agency, como lo llamaría el profesor Schoenfeld, o autonomía sobre las matemáticas, desarrollan una hipótesis o presentan una solución que no estaba esperada. Efectivamente, esta es una propiedad conocida y volveremos después un poquito sobre ella. Quizás pueda enriquecer mi arsenal de explicaciones. Otra respuesta pragmática para el profesor, ¿por qué le conviene al profesor tener alguna idea de soluciones alternativas? Y acá voy a traer un ejemplo que está ampliamente discutido y hermosamente discutido en el libro de Seymour Papert, Mindstorms, tormentas de pensamiento podría traducirse al español, en el cual Seymour Papert, que fue el creador del idioma Logo, presenta este pequeño problema que seguramente es muy conocido por todos ustedes, pero no lo que Papert dice sobre él, que es menos conocido. Tomemos el globo terráqueo y alrededor de su ecuador, imaginémoslo como hacen los físicos, que es una esfera perfecta, no hay valles, no hay ríos, no hay montañas. Tomemos una cinta y colocámosla sobre el ecuador de la Tierra. Esa cinta va a tener una cierta longitud, que es el diámetro del ecuador de la Tierra. Ahora dice Papert en el problema, tomemos pilotes de 2 metros de altura a lo largo del ecuador y elevemos esta cinta 2 metros sobre estos pilotes. Intuitivamente, vemos que el diámetro de la Tierra ha crecido, o sea que intuitivamente sabemos que vamos a necesitar más cinta para esto. La pregunta es, intuitivamente, ¿cuánto más cinta necesitamos? Y la respuesta intuitiva de mucha gente, es decir, se necesita mucha más cinta porque es una longitud bastante grande la que tenemos que cubrir. Si recurrimos al álgebra, el cálculo es muy simple. Supongamos que estamos con las mismas unidades, tenemos la nueva circunferencia, que es 2pi por r más 2, suponemos que todo esté dado en metros, menos 2pi por r, y da la sorprendente respuesta de 4pi. 4pi son 12 metros. La respuesta es sorprendente por dos motivos. Primero, porque la cantidad es tan pequeña. Pero más sorprendente aún es la respuesta porque no depende del radio de la Tierra. O sea que esta respuesta sería válida si la aplico a una pelota de fútbol o la aplico a todo el cosmos. Es decir, que eso es realmente muy sorprendente, la independencia del radio de la Tierra. Y entonces dice Papert, hasta acá el problema conocido. Lo interesante es la discusión que hace Papert de este problema. Dice, aquí habrá muchos para quienes este escueto, conciso y mágico manejo algebraico lo entienden, entienden la sintáctica, entienden el resultado, pero se resisten a que esto congenie con su intuición primera de que se necesitaba mucha más cinta. Y muchos dirán, yo aún pienso que se necesita mucha más cinta. Y dice Papert, uno de los errores que cometemos en educación matemática es decirles a nuestros alumnos, ¿ves? La intuición te falla. Por eso no hay que creer tanto en la intuición y hay que formalizar y hay que usar elementos formales para que no nos dejemos llevar por nuestros sentidos. Y dice Papert, ese momento, esta recomendación que muchos les damos a nuestros alumnos, de desechar su intuición y crear en lo simbólico, es el comienzo del divorcio entre muchos y las matemáticas. Dicen, las matemáticas yo tengo una idea, las matemáticas me convencen de otra, esto no es para mí, no va conmigo. Y dice Papert, mi obligación en este momento no es decir, sí, todavía es contraintuitivo, y mi obligación es tratar de hablar, conversar, dialogar con la intuición del alumno para convencerlo de que detrás de lo simbólico también puede haber algo que sea más convincente o que pueda doblegar o educar mi intuición, dice Papert. Por lo tanto, mi obligación es crear una solución alternativa y mostrársela a los alumnos, a aquellos que todavía están aferrados a su intuición de que se necesita mucha más cinta. Y lo que él hace es un ejercicio visual sumamente interesante. Dice, imagínense que la Tierra fuera un cubo y no una esfera. Si fuera un cubo, su ecuador, el corte, sería un cuadrado. Elevemos los pilotes, no sé si ustedes pueden apreciar mi señalador, elevemos los pilotes 2 metros en todo alrededor del cubo, y fíjense que a lo largo de los lados del cuadrado he elevado 2 metros sin añadir ni 1 centímetro de cinta. Lo único que se ha añadido en el cuadrado son las esquinas, pero las esquinas no tienen nada que ver con la longitud del cuadrado. Lo que yo he agregado es esto, y esto, más esto, forman una circunferencia cuyo radio es precisamente la altura a la cual elevé los pilotes. O sea que no tengo ninguna dependencia de los lados del rectángulo. Hagamos lo mismo con un hexágono. No un hexágono, sino un octógono. Y vamos a ver exactamente el mismo fenómeno. Y así podemos ir deformándolo hasta que obtengamos una circunferencia. Probablemente esto no convenza a todos, pero habla mucho más directamente a lo visual, a lo intuitivo, que la cuestión del álgebra. O sea que volviendo a la postura del proveerle al profesor de una solución alternativa, es para enriquecer su bagaje de herramientas que le permiten presentar a sus alumnos explicaciones que pueden llegar a ser convincentes y que según Papert pueden ser críticas en el hecho de que el alumno le tenga un poco más de confianza a las matemáticas. Volvamos ahora, si de visual se trata, a una explicación alternativa de por qué una fracción de este tipo es intermedia de estas dos. Es decir, podemos demostrarlo algebraicamente, pero otra vez caemos en lo simbólico que por ser tan poderoso y tan general, es a la vez opaco. Representemos fracciones de esta manera, donde el denominador es el eje de las abscisas y el numerador es el eje de las ordenadas, por la simple razón que quiero asociarlo también con la pendiente de la recta, donde todas las fracciones de un tercio van a estar sobre la misma, las fracciones que son igual, representan el mismo número racional, un tercio, 2/6, 3/9, etc., van a estar sobre la misma recta, y representemos esta fracción 4/5 así. ¿Qué representación gráfica tendría la suma de numerador más numerador y denominador más denominador? Pues sería la regla del paralelogramo, ¿verdad? Y ahí el estar entre adquiere o recupera el significado aún físico de estar entre dos. Lo interesante de esta representación es que si yo en lugar de escribir un tercio, escribo 2/6, que estará por acá, voy a poder seguir aplicando la misma regla, pero voy a obtener otra fracción, no los 5/8, pero va a seguir estando entre las dos fracciones dadas. O sea que esto es una especie de convicción visual de que esto siempre funciona, por la regla del paralelogramo. O sea que esta solución alternativa a la demostración de lo que propuso el alumno puede llegar a ser más convincente. Y ahora vamos un poquito a las preocupaciones del alumno. Si el problema ya está resuelto, ¿para qué resolverlo de nuevo? Fijémonos en este problema. ¿Cuántos rectángulos hay en un tablero de ajedrez? Bueno, podemos resolverlos de muchas maneras. Y lo que quiero mostrarles, porque no me voy a demorar demasiado en mostrarles solamente el esquema de las distintas soluciones, es que cada solución ilustra una estrategia diferente, un método de demostración diferente, y hay soluciones que pueden ser generalizables, o sea que buscar una solución alternativa también es buscar una forma, qué manera puedo generalizar este problema a un cuadrado de n por n, o aún a un rectángulo de m por n. Acá va una. Voy aplicando las estrategias o las heurísticas que mencionara Schoenfeld, voy a casos particulares, qué pasa en 1x1, en 2x2, en 3x3, y voy viendo que hay una cierta regularidad, que son números, son cuadrados de números triangulares, o sea que mi generalización puede ser esta, y voy después a demostrarlo por inducción completa. Otra solución posible, ¿cuántos rectángulos hay de 8x8? 1. ¿Cuántos hay de 8x7? 2. Y así sucesivamente, y después vengo y llego exactamente al mismo resultado, pero mediante otra estrategia. O sea que las soluciones alternativas acá me están enseñando a aplicar distintas estrategias, a conocer una rama de estrategias que pueden ser aplicables a otros problemas. O sea que lo que estoy aprendiendo acá no solo es la respuesta final de cuántos rectángulos hay, sino que estoy aprendiendo estrategias de resolución. Una tercera solución es más visual en su efecto. ¿Cómo puedo identificar los rectángulos? Por dos vértices opuestos. Acá identifiqué un rectángulo. Entonces, ¿cuántos pares de dos vértices opuestos hay? Y contando eso, llego a la misma solución. Esta es otra táctica, otra estrategia muy interesante, que puede ser generalizada a rectángulos y no solo a cuadrados. O sea que ahí hay una pequeña respuesta al alumno del por qué la utilidad de conocer soluciones alternativas. Este problema me resulta sumamente interesante, primero porque me ocurrió a mí en persona, cuando yo era estudiante del comienzo de mis estudios en la universidad en Buenos Aires, donde coleccionaba para un amigo billetes de colectivo, de autobús, que eran palíndromos. Los billetes en aquel entonces tenían 5 cifras. Y a mí se me planteó la pregunta de cuál sería la probabilidad de que a mí me saliera un palíndromo. Pero para eso tenía que saber cuántos números palíndromos hay de 5 cifras. Si ustedes plantean el problema ¿cuántos números palíndromos de 5 cifras hay? La solución clásica es, bueno, en el primer cuadrado entran, si acepto que el 0 sea una cifra factible y en los billetes lo es, acá entran 10, perdón, acá entran 10, acá entran otros 10 y acá entran otros 10. Estos están fijos por este y estos están fijos por este, o sea que 10 por 10 por 10 es 1000. O sea que en 100.000 números, del 00000 al 99999, los 100.000 números, hay 1000 números, o sea que hay una posibilidad de 1 en 100 que a mí me salga un palíndromo. Resulta que cuando voy esa no fue mi manera de pensar. Mi manera de pensar fue la siguiente. Acá tengo el número, este es tomado de un museo de antigüedades, el aparato que tenía el colectivero al vender los boletos, eso ya no existe más, los va arrancando secuencialmente uno por uno. Supongamos que a mí me ha salido el 34221. Mi razonamiento fue el siguiente. Las últimas dos cifras son 21. Para que este fuera palíndromo yo tendría que haber llegado al 34, al 43. O sea que me faltarían unos 22 números más o menos para tener un palíndromo. ¿Y cuántos números anteriores tendría que tendría que contar para ver cuándo salió el anterior? O sea que para eso tendría que haberse cambiado esta cifra. O sea, que el razonamiento fue que, el razonamiento fue el siguiente. El próximo después será cuando la cifra esta cambie de un 2 a un 3. O sea que habrá 1 en 100. Ese fue mi razonamiento inicial. Completamente diferente, una solución completamente alternativa a la solución combinatórica de 10 por 10 por 10. Pero yo no me quedé conforme con esa solución porque digo, hay números, como por ejemplo, este número que es palíndromo, el próximo palíndromo no va a estar 100 números más allá, sino que va a estar mucho más cerca. Entonces, ¿cómo es eso de que es 1 en 100? Y pensándolo un poco más, me di cuenta de que la densidad sigue siendo 1 en 100, pero la distribución dentro de cada centena no es necesariamente a 100 de distancia del número anterior o del número posterior. O sea que esta solución alternativa me dio la pauta de que la historia que rodea al problema, en este caso, la secuencialidad en que los billetes de colectivo salían uno detrás de otro, tiene que ver, puede inducir una estrategia para resolver el problema. Es decir, que a veces la solución alternativa surge de consideraciones de la historia que estamos modelando, de la historia a partir de la cual abstraímos un problema matemático. Muchas veces nosotros estamos acostumbrados que en los textos de la escuela, la historia que rodea un problema verbal, un problema de palabras, es un mero ornamento o una excusa para hacer una modelación matemática que a veces es artificial. Y a veces, como en este caso, la historia no solo induce una solución completamente diferente, porque el contexto era diferente, sino que puede llegar a ayudarme a descubrir una propiedad matemática que de ninguna manera la puedo ver si hago la solución de 10 por 10 por 10, la solución típica combinatórica. O sea que al alumno le estoy diciendo que a veces la solución alternativa descubre o desvela o revela una estructura, una propiedad matemática que estaba oculta, opaca en una solución anterior. Y el último ejemplo que quiero comentar con ustedes está tomado precisamente de una clase de resolución de problemas del profesor Schoenfeld, por allá a los comienzos de los años 90. Tuve la suerte y el privilegio de asistir a todas sus clases de resolución de problemas, filmarlas y comentarlas con él. En una de las clases, Alan Schoenfeld les dio a sus alumnos un problema para hacer como tarea en su hogar. Y les preguntó ¿qué fecha sería? No me acuerdo si este es el número exacto, pero ¿qué fecha sería el 14 de diciembre del año 2054? La idea del profesor Schoenfeld era que los alumnos de alguna manera llegaran a tropezar o a redescubrir la aritmética modular. Es decir, si hoy es 19 de febrero, dentro de una semana, el 26 de febrero, va a ser un viernes. O sea que si voy en saltos de a 7, puedo ir recreando la aritmética módulo 7 y de alguna manera, efectivizando este procedimiento, llegar a redescubrir una fecha teniendo en cuenta los años bisiesto y todo lo demás. Ingeniosamente recrear un artefacto matemático para resolver este problema. La sorpresa del profesor Schoenfeld fue que cuando a la clase siguiente una alumna le dijo que había resuelto el problema, y al preguntarle cómo lo resolvió, esperando que surja toda la cuestión de aritmética modular y ese razonamiento, la alumna le dijo: me fijé en la computadora en un programa de los calendarios y resulta que el 14 de diciembre del 2054 es un lunes. Una solución alternativa que en un ámbito, digamos, donde en una oficina se necesita urgentemente saber por algún motivo qué día de la semana es esta fecha, esta persona tuvo recursos, tuvo la habilidad, tuvo la destreza de buscar, de saber dónde buscar y de encontrar la respuesta. En una clase de matemáticas esto puede llegar a tomarse como una especie de violación de una norma, de no entender que la respuesta es totalmente irrelevante y que el proceso es lo que lleva a ser interesante. O sea que la cuestión de soluciones alternativas es también el mensaje de que en el proceso de resolver un problema estamos aprendiendo matemáticas, estamos aprendiendo estrategias, estamos aprendiendo a razonar, estamos aprendiendo a entender, a convencernos de que lo simbólico no es solamente una magia, y resulta que esa es una de las cuestiones de crear valores en la clase de matemáticas acerca de qué es el hábito de resolver un problema. Les he mostrado algunas de las razones de por qué las soluciones alternativas es una práctica, una norma que puede ser útil en manos del profesor y en manos del alumno. Es desvelar y legitimizar diferentes maneras de pensar, incluida la de los alumnos. En una clase donde hay agency, donde hay autonomía, donde el alumno se siente libre y legitimado para hablar, puede llegar a producir soluciones que el profesor a lo mejor desconoce. Desvelar estructuras ocultas, como por ejemplo en el caso del palíndromo. La emergencia más directa de una generalización, como en el caso del tablero de ajedrez. El conocimiento de estrategias, por ejemplo, de conteo, como en el caso del ajedrez, y también inculcar valores del quehacer matemático y el placer que implica, aun cuando sabemos el resultado de un problema, tratar de abordarlo de otra manera. Y muchos otros motivos, y ustedes quedan invitados a identificarlos. Lo que quise es convencerlos de que estas soluciones, esta cuestión de soluciones alternativas tiene mucho que ver en crear clases matemáticas ricas, y que si lo hacemos tenemos que darnos con disolver el antagonismo tanto de posibles de maestros como de alumnos. Puedes aprender más resolviendo un problema de muchas maneras diferentes que resolviendo muchos problemas diferentes, cada uno de una sola manera. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, doctor Abraham Arcavi. Tenemos un espacio de 5 minutos para preguntas. El chat está activado por si tienen alguna pregunta para hacerle al doctor Abraham. Creo que no hay preguntas, todo está claro. Profe Osvaldo.
Bien, Ángela.
Bien, agradecemos al doctor Arcavi su exposición, a la doctora Diana por la moderación y a todos ustedes por permanecer conectados en este gran evento. Los invitamos a tomar un receso para el almuerzo. Les recordamos, por favor, volver a conectarse en horas de la tarde con 10 minutos de anticipación para los espacios académicos, donde se realizarán las jornadas paralelas. Recuerden que después de las conferencias paralelas tendremos las comunicaciones de presentación de los PSG. Les recordamos ser puntuales en la asistencia. Los links de conexión se encuentran en la programación enviada a sus correos electrónicos para que por favor puntualmente nos acompañen en horas de la tarde. Muchas gracias a todos y que tengan un buen